seat.
Go ahead and have a seat. We're getting ready to get started.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Mr.
Everybody get your seat.
All right. All right, so just remember, anybody get out of line tonight, you got to deal with Deb, all right?
Yes, got it under control.
Okay, so for those of you that are online, last week we had a malfunction, we got knocked off, we couldn't get back on, so you know it's on YouTube. If you didn't catch it yet, you can catch it there. We weren't able to reconnect last week. I hope that don't happen this week. Okay, there's some new people here. So do me a favor, guys. If you're going to invite somebody to this, from this point forward, have them, this is the week 4. And when you miss a week, you miss a lot of information. So encourage them to watch, if they're not willing to watch the weeks prior on YouTube, just to catch up, tell them to wait till next year when we start again. Okay? Ralph used to come to this class 20 years ago, and we were just talking about it before the meeting. In those days, before social media, was if you didn't show up one week, you weren't allowed back the next week. But today we have social media, so you can miss a week, but we expect you sometime during the week to catch up. Okay? Because again, you'll miss a lot of useful information if you miss 1 week. All right, I think we finished the doctor's opinion, right?
Yep.
And one of the things I wanted to say to you guys, at this point, everybody should know what they're working the steps on. Okay? If you're new, of course, alcohol and drugs, you should be working the steps on that. If you've been around for a long time, I'm sure you've got something that you can work the steps on. Figure out what it is, and the process is the same except for the first step. The first step is the only one that addresses the problem, okay? And after the first step, the process is exactly the same no matter what you're working the steps on. So we've got some ladies here that are working steps on food, and I asked them if it was all right to talk about that, and they said yeah, because that's probably the most difficult thing to work the steps on. And the reason for that is you cannot practice abstinence. You have to eat, right? So my hat's off to you there. But the process is still the same. And on the board today, I got 2 simple questions. 2 simple questions. We talked about this in week 1 a little bit. Why are you powerless over alcohol, or fill in the blank, whatever your drug of no choice was. Why are you powerless over alcohol? And what is the first step in recovery? 2 basic, simple questions that most people who come to the rooms don't know the answer to. And when we're done with this, by the time we finish the first step, you will know why you're powerless. Okay? The answers are in the book. And you will also know what the first step in recovery is. We talked about that, I think, on week 1. And when you ask people what the first step in recovery is, they always say, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. And that is not the first step in recovery. That is the first of the 12 steps. But just so you know, okay, they're having the ladies in Florida are having a party. You have, okay, Barbara, Kathy, Robin, Charlotte, hi. Okay, so, and what we're going to start on Bill's story this weekend. And Bill's story is an example, it's an example of the problem. It's so you can identify, right? And that's Bill's whole story, that's what it's there for. Back in the early days when this was AA was first starting, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, and Bill Dobson, who happens to be the man on the bed, if you ever see that picture. That's Bill Dobson. So those were the first 3 AA guys. And what they used to do, they used to go to the hospital when somebody went to the hospital, or when somebody was on a bad bender, they'd go to their house after they'd been out for a couple of days in crash, and they'd go there and they'd talk to them mostly about their drinking experience and what kind of drunks they were, right? And so when it came time to write the book, the question that they had was, how do we replace the hospital visit or the house visit? You know, how do we do that? What's the best way that we can replace that? And they decided that the best way to do that was for Bill to tell his story right up front. Okay? So Bill's story is really an example of the problem. And that's what we talked about. If you weren't here at the beginning, just real quick, I don't want to go back and keep repeating myself, but the triangle, the recovery part of the triangles, which this here is what we're focusing on in this class, is just the recovery part of the triangle, right? And the recovery part is broken into 3 parts. What is the problem? What is the solution? What is the program of action? Okay? So we're studying now for weeks, we'll be studying what is the problem. Okay? And if you're working the steps on, whatever you're working the steps on, you know, we want to be able to, if you go to page 30 in your book real quick, and look at the second paragraph on page 30, it says, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. And what's the next sentence say? This is the first step in recovery. So, if you say, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, that is not the first step in recovery. What we just read on page 30 is the first step in recovery. Okay? So what that means is that I didn't know when I got here how to learn it. So we learned that we had to fully concede. And when we get to the end of step 1, that's the exercise we're going to learn how to do on how to work the first step. Okay? But just so you understand that that's where we're getting to. Okay? And in Bill's story, when we turn to Bill's story now in your book, and the first 4 pages of Bill's story is kind of pertinent to Bill and his life. So we'll just scoot right over to page 5, okay? And not that you shouldn't read the first 4 pages, but it's more pertinent to who Bill was. And you can and when you study this book, you should be able to, when you read a paragraph, you want to see how what you just read relates to your own life, okay? So we'll pick up on page 5, and the first paragraph on page 5, it says, liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin, followed by half a dozen bottles of beer, would be required if I would eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. There were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So if you're just reading this stuff, you know, it doesn't take on the meaning that it needs to take on. And if you're studying this, you've got to really think about it. And the way we study, again, is we read 2 paragraphs and stop and write any questions we have right in the book, in your margins, and then reread the 2 paragraphs to see if there's anything else we need to talk about. But make believe, if you can, make believe that you're normal, okay? You know, for some of you that may be a tough thing to do. But pretend that you're normal, okay? And I shared with you that I wake up very early in the morning shaking violently. That I have to have a tumbler full of gin and half a dozen bottles of beers just so I can eat breakfast. Again, if you were normal, you would say, wow, that's a sick son of a bitch. Right? A normal person would think, my God, there's something wrong with him. Wouldn't he? Right? What normal person wouldn't think that? You know, and for some of you that are non-alcoholics, you're drug addicts in here, it's the same difference, you know. You stayed up for 3 days getting high, you know. So you didn't wake up early, you never went to sleep. But the point is that any normal person that you said this to or were to read this would say to themselves, my God, what a sick, this person's really got some problems. And what does Bill say? Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. To Bill, it's not a big deal that he wakes up shaking violently every morning and that he's got to have a tumbler full of gin and a half a dozen bottles of beer just so he can eat breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. So in his mind, he's not anywhere near the surrender point. He's sick and suffering and don't want to see it yet. And just like I'm sure most of you are, and certainly myself, I was at that point for a good 5 years before I got sober. Just doing it over and over again, swearing that I would never do it again, coming home after 3 days and tiptoeing in the house, real quiet like so I wouldn't wake up the wife, and lay down in bed and just lay there and not be able to sleep and just think of some stupid shit like, when I wake up tomorrow, all that money I spent is going to be under the pillow. And my wife's going to say, oh, you're home, honey, I missed you. And the kids are going to run and jump on my lap. Daddy, Daddy, we love you. And I'd lay there for untold hours until I'd pass out. And I'd get up in the morning and I'd come to and I'd look under the pillow, there'd be no money there. And I hear my wife in the kitchen, I go in the kitchen and she'd look at me and she'd say, you son of a bitch, you did it again. And I'd been out for 3 days and I smelled and I needed a shave and my eyes were sunken in and the kids would run in, they hear my voice, they run in the kitchen, they look at me, they run back in their room. Because I look like death warmed over. That's the reality. But nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. And if you're working the steps tonight on something other than alcohol and drugs, it's the same. You look at the same kind of situations, how you can, you know, I have a story to share, which is, you know, I don't suffer from what you suffer from, and I don't know if I can even relate to it, but I do have a, when I first got sober, one night I made a nice London broil, which I don't know about how, in New York we call them London broils. Over here it's a piece of, like a beef roast, you know. And I sliced it real thin and I ate it, and I had to go to a meeting, so I wrapped it up, I put it in the refrigerator, and when I came home I sliced a little more and I ate it, and it was good and I liked it, and I kept eating it, and I ate the whole London broil. You know, I just couldn't stop doing that. And so, for those of you that are early in your recovery, a lot of times we kind of, you know, we take that obsessiveness and we put it on other things, and so you need to be careful with that, okay? So anyway, back to Bill. So Bill talks about, nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. He says, gradually things got worse. I don't know how much worse they can get from there, but he lost the house and his mother-in-law died and his father-in-law became ill, and then he got a good job, and he was going to make a lot of money, and he went on a bender and he blew it all. Okay? So again, what story in your life kind of relates to that kind of thing? And he says, I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. You know, that's one of these, I swear to God, I'm not going to do that no more. Right? Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business. And so did I. This time I really mean it. This time I'm serious. This time I swear to God. Right? And really what he's doing there is he's relying on his will. He's mustering up his will to combat the alcoholism. It's never going to happen. It's never going to win like that. Okay? Look what he says next. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. So now, I'm sure, like me and like many of you, I'm sure, I start questioning my sanity. I was questioning my sanity way before this. But we start questioning our sanity, you know, and it's a funny thing when somebody comes into AA and they wonder if they're alcoholic. They're not sure if they're alcoholic. To me, that's hilarious. Because nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, my life is great, I think I'll join AA. I don't know about you guys, but for me, Alcoholics Anonymous was the last house on the block. I tried everything humanly possible not to wind up here. And this is where I wound up. Right? So, normal people know they're not alcoholic, then there's nothing else to think about. So if you're questioning yourself, are you really alcoholic? Chances are, you know, the book says we don't declare anybody alcoholic, but some of you, I can tell you right away, you're real alcoholic. And you know who you are. Renewing my resolve. So what does that mean? Renewing my resolve is mustering up my willpower again. This time I really mean it. Before I meant it, but this time I really, really mean it. Before I really meant it, this time I really, really mean it. There's an extra really in there, you know, because this time I really, really mean it. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. I could laugh at the gin males. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into the cafe to telephone. In no time I was beating on the bar asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. I don't know about you guys, but who could not relate to that shit? Right? There was more than one time that I told myself I'm not going to do nothing. I ain't going to do nothing. I'm just going to go there and I'm not going to do nothing. I owned after-hour clubs, nightclubs. So when I went to work, it was, you know, and I told myself I ain't going to do nothing. And I really meant it. But once I took a drink, then I easily tell myself, oh, I already screwed up, so the hell with it. You know, it's easy to lie to ourselves. Very easy. And now I love what Bill says here. These are great first step words. Look what the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. When I got here, I had a terrible sense of impending calamity. I actually found out what it really was after I was here a little while. You know what it was? It was impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. The morning paper told me the market had gone to hell. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. And so you can see Bill, the progression in Bill as he's relating his, now this is all in hindsight that he's writing this, right? But you can see the progression that nevertheless I thought I could control the situation, and then sicking the willpower after my problem, and now thinking, am I nuts? And then now he's at the point where, should I kill myself? And I don't know about you, but I thought about that on occasion. But I'm too vain to kill myself, I guess. I don't know. I'm homicidal, but definitely not suicidal. So I'm not going to hurt me, but I'm going to hurt you. But meanwhile, I'm killing me, and I don't know. Right? I don't mind hurting you, and what I'm doing really is I'm really killing me. And Bill says the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes he took money from his wife, and then he'd lay there, and the mental torture was hellish, he said. He didn't know if he could make it through the night. He'd sleep on the floor. And then he says the doctor came and gave him a heavy sedative. So you know, in Bill's story and in Dr. Bob's story, they both talk about taking pills. So next time you have a real AA big book guy or AA guy in front of you that don't like talking about alcohol and drugs, you can remind them that Bill and Bob both take drugs. You know, our little card we read in the meeting say to keep your talk related to alcoholism, you know. My alcoholism has a lot to do with cocaine, but I don't share that when I'm in an AA meeting, because I don't need to. I've got enough alcohol problems that I can talk about. I qualify for all of those. So he says, next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity, so did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking. I was 40 pounds underweight. I don't remember how much I weighed when I got sober, but it was probably about 100 pounds less than I am now, all these years later. And the next paragraph, he's talking about the belladonna treatment, and he's talking about the doctor who explained that he was selfish and foolish. But he's been seriously, he says, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. And again, make note of that. I said, every time we go through this book and it talks about mind and body or mental and physical, you should make a note about that, because it talks about that 100 and something times. How we have this twofold disease. Mind and body, mental and physical. He says, it relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of despair and desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. That means he was sober. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. And he went back to the hospital, and he comes out of the hospital, and his wife thought he was going to die from the DTs, and you know, he was going to get wet brain, and he had about a year to live, they thought. And he says, they did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities and my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. So he's really in a very desperate, despairing mode. And then I love the words he used now. Great, again, first step words. No words could tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. We like self-pity, people like us, don't we? We could drink the shit out of stuff, self-pity. You know, we go to the jukebox and play that sad song over and over again. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Again, if you're alcoholic, then you don't relate to this. There's something the matter. Alcohol was my master. And then he says, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And he got drunk again. And go down a little bit in that paragraph. He says, how dark it is before the dawn. Bill was very poetic, if you hadn't noticed. In reality, that was the beginning of my last. I was soon to be capitulated into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that was incredibly more wonderful as time passed. Does anybody not know? You know what the fourth dimension is? Does anybody? Do you know what the fourth dimension is? Does anybody know what the fourth dimension is? So who doesn't know what the fourth dimension is? Raise your hand. Okay. There's no such thing as the fourth dimension. It's Bill being poetic. It's poetic justice. There's three dimensions of life, and Bill saying that all three dimensions of life were there for happening for him, and then some. Okay? And then some. That's all he's saying. He's just saying the words that he uses right after that. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time goes. Okay? But in all actuality, there's no such thing as the fourth dimension. I know we have 4G TVs and stuff now, but... He says, near the end of the bleak November, I was sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he could come over. He was sober. And he's talking about Ebby Thatcher, okay? So Ebby was Bill's friend, and what happened with Ebby was up in New Hampshire or somewhere around there, and he got in trouble, and he was about to be committed for alcoholic insanity. And a couple of guys, 3 guys showed up and saved him. You know, Ebby had money, and he ran in the circles of people who had money, and one of the guys was Roland. And Roland had money too and knew the judge. And these guys were all members of the Oxford group, and they convinced the judge to not commit Ebby, but to let him go with them. And the judge agreed to that on one condition, that he had to leave town. He was like kicked out of town. And so Ebby got sober in the Oxford group, and Bill says. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of fertility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. And not to spend a lot of time, but why do you think Bill was thinking like that? That what he just said, what he just shared, that he could. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. Why do you think that has any importance? Or do you think that has any importance?
I was always trying to do that. I wanted to be just that drunk. I didn't want to be as drunk. I just wanted to be captured. That good feeling.
Yeah. But think of his mind frame where he's at, right? He went from the point where he nevertheless he thought he could control the situation to asking himself if he was crazy, and then being full of fear, and then wanting to kill himself. And he's at the point now where everything just sucks. Life just sucks. And all he can do is drink his life away. That's all he can do. And so there's no way to think about the future. I have no future. My life is here in this room with this bottle. And the here and now is horrible. The here and now is horrible, and the future doesn't exist, and he's miserable, and he's desperate, and he's depressed. And the only thing that'll bring him any comfort is to remember about once upon a time when things were different. Does that make sense to you? Well, once upon a time, when I didn't have these feelings and drinking was fun, and that's all I care to think about now, because that's the only thing that could bring him any kind of pleasure. So he says, the door opened, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed the drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come on, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me simply but smilingly said, I've got religion. Now the Oxford group, you have to remember, was a religious group that thought they had found a cure for alcoholism. Okay? It started off as a religious thing. It got way off track. But it's kind of like the Washingtonians back in the 1800s. They were also a religious organization. I was a Gus, so that was it. Last summer, an alcohol crack pat. Now I suspect a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told me how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told him of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. What turns out to be what is the solution and what is the program of action? On our 3 parts, okay? That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly, I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So, until you realize how hopeless you are, and remember I shared with you a week or 2 ago, that until you can relate to somebody in the rooms, you can't begin to recover until you can relate. And he could relate to, when I was in the hospital, when I got sober, a guy came in the hospital, I was in prison with. And he, of course, became my sponsor. And he was my Ebby. Same thing. You know, I got loaded with this guy many, many times over the years, and I knew how he was, and I knew he was different. And that's what we're going to find out here now. Go over to the next page. And the 3rd paragraph, it says, but my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctor has pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and that was none at all. I want to talk about that paragraph. That's an important paragraph. A lot of times we read right through that and we don't look at that and we don't really talk about that and we don't really get it. That's a very powerful paragraph right there, that little short paragraph. He says, had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and that was none at all. So here he is, and I had the same experience with the guy who came to the treatment center when I was in the hospital. It was a hospital, and the guy came to the hospital when I was there. And I had the same experience, because here's Bill sitting at the table across from Abby, and Bill said, had this power originated in him? Of course it had not. See, Bill knew him. He knew what kind of drunk he was. He knew that this power didn't originate in him. So then, if he knew that, then the only thing that makes sense is to ask himself, well, where the hell did he get it from? And then follow that up with a natural thing like, if he didn't have it, but he got it now, where did he get it from? I want some too. I want that too. Those are natural questions in his mind. Had this power originated in him? It had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and that was none at all. So at one point, Ebby had no more power than Bill had that day, sitting there drunk, full of depression, full of hopelessness, full of despair. Remember that test tube we did last week? that we made with all of those things in it? And that's who Bill was at that moment. And he's looking at Eben and he's saying to himself, where did he get this power from? How did he get this power? Look what he says next. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. Done the impossible. It took a drunk just like him and changed him. That's a powerful message. You can't have a more powerful message than that. And I experienced that. When I was in the hospital dying from this shit, and this guy came in that I know. And just like Ebby, there was something different in his eyes. Bill says, my ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. The man was completely different. Now, this next paragraph, Bill talks about, even though this miracle is sitting in front of me, even though it's bringing me some hope, because if he could do it, and I could do it, even with all of that, he says to himself, despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still arouses certainty. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. And then he goes down, look what he says in the next paragraph. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? That's, people, you have to understand something. That sentence right there is one of the most powerful, freeing sentences in our whole literature. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? 2 points that sentence brings out. 2 points, very important. You might want to write this in your book. 1, if I tell you to choose your own conception of God, I am no longer carrying a religious message. Very important. Because there's no religion in the world that allows you to pick your own God. Every religion that exists has what we call dogma. This is God, and this is how you get there. This is God, and this is how you get there. That's every religion in the world. So if I tell you to pick your own God, now I'm not talking about religion. Very important. The next important thing about that statement is, I'm telling you to choose your own thing. So if it's your own choice, who the hell are you going to argue with? You can't argue with me, it's your idea, not mine. Isn't that funny? We sit in the rooms and we have an idea, and now we want to argue with us about our own idea. I'm not arguing with you about your idea. I'm not telling your idea is wrong or bad, but you still want to argue about it. Pretty sick thinking, right? I mean, the alcoholic individually is a sick person. So when we have a room full of alcoholics, we have a room full of sick people. I always find it real funny when somebody talks about, you know, how well they are. Just think about that for a minute, you know. Where we came from, what we've done, and where we're sitting today, and how well we are. Yeah. Anyway, so Bill's sitting there and he's thinking, I never rejected my own conception of anything, really. If I have an idea, I think it's a great idea. I don't know about you, but I don't come up with ideas and go, that sucks. When I come up with an idea, I go, that's brilliant, Danny. Usually they turn out to be sucky ideas, but my initial thought is my idea is a brilliant idea. So, I'm not carrying a religious message, and I'm letting you choose your own ideas so you can't argue with me about it, right? Very important when we're dealing with other people. When we get to step 2, we're going to learn, and I don't want to get too far into it, there's 2 qualifications in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous about what a higher power should be. And the first one is in the second step itself. It says a power greater than us. And the other qualification for a higher power says it must make sense to you. So when people talk about a doorknob, a light bulb, a tree, and all that shit, that don't qualify. We were talking before the meeting about that, and I said I don't ever tell anybody with their higher power should or shouldn't be unless they talk to me about a light bulb. Then I got something to say. Because if you think the light bulb is more powerful than us, you might not be in the right room. They got special rooms for people like that. They got beds on the walls and stuff. But we'll get into that when we do the second step. So Bill says, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth would start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So, right there, Bill takes the second step. Upon a foundation of complete willingness. So the foundation of the 12 steps is a willingness. Okay? And the first step requires a willingness too. A willingness to what? A willingness to change. Okay? Step 1 is a willingness to change. Step 2 is a belief that I can change. Step 3 is a decision to change. Steps 4 and 5 is action to change. Steps 6 and 7 is more action to change. Steps 8 and 9 is continuously more action to change. And 10 and 11 is again more action to change. And step 12, I've changed. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I am now able to do and be what I wasn't able to do and be before. That is a spiritual awakening. One of the things that I hope you learn as we go through this course is, I hope you learn what your problem is, what the solution is, what the program of action is, because that's what the program is all about. I hope you learn why you are powerless, okay? Because I hear too many people talk in the rooms about they don't know why they're sober. And then they immediately grab the newcomer after the meeting and let me help you. I don't know why I'm there, so let me help you understand why you're not don't know either. I don't know why I'm sober, now let me help you understand why you're not, so that you don't understand why you're sober either. Listen, I know why I'm sober. Not only do I know why I'm sober, I know what my problem is, I know what the solution is, I know what my program of action is. I know all this, and because I know all this, and I don't just know it intellectually, I know it from experience, and because I know this and have experienced it, I am able to take another drunk and help him recover as well. Does it make any sense to say, I don't know how I'm sober, I don't know why I'm sober, I don't know how I got here, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm going to help you get to the same place I'm at? When I got here, I already didn't know who I was, what I was, and why I was here. I don't need you to tell me, help me get there. I was already there. I need somebody to tell me, I understand what your problem is. I know the way out, and I can help you get there. That's what the new people need. So if you don't understand why you are what you are, you have to hopefully learn it here. Regardless of how long you're sober. I tell you, I sponsored a guy 47 years sober, now he's about 54 years sober. He asked me with 47 years of sobriety to sponsor him. I had about 25 years at the time. He didn't understand why he was here. He didn't know why he was here, what he was doing here. And his life was shit, but he hadn't had a drink in 47 years. But his life was falling apart. He was on his third divorce. Right? So this goes way beyond drinking and drugging. But you got to understand what the problem is, what the solution is, and what the program of action is. So Bill said, upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. So the next page, he says, at the hospital I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of DTs. So now, Bill just spent the first, from page 5 to now, talking about over and over again the first step, right? We pointed out a few, loneliness and all that stuff, and quicksand and all that stuff. Bill talked about the first step. Then he just talked about the second step. And now, in these next 2 paragraphs, the next 3 paragraphs, he's going to talk about the remaining 12 steps. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. Step 3. I ruthlessly faced my sins. Step 4. And became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. 6 and 7. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me and I fully equated him with my problems and deficiencies. Step 5. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical to them. Of them, I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Steps 8 and 9. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Step 10. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit, the rest of this is step 11. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. All of that is step 11. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Step 12. And I want to talk about that a second. That I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. We're not just talking about alcohol or drugs. I'm talking about all my problems. So, if you're 5 years sober, right? It doesn't make sense to go to your sponsor and say, let's work the steps. Okay, we're going to work the steps on alcohol. Well, you haven't had a drink in 5 years. Well, I'm sure you got some other pressing problems that that'll fucking your life up more than alcohol right now, right? If you just look at step 12, it tells you that we're supposed to work the steps in all our affairs. There's no need to work the steps on alcohol and drugs if you've been sober for a while and you've worked the steps already on that. I don't know about you guys, but I got a whole bag of shit that I need to get better with. And none of it is alcohol and drugs. I haven't had a drink in over 28 years. You can't convince me that I'm powerless over alcohol. You see, because the book doesn't tell us that we remain powerless. In fact, the book says quite the opposite. The book says we have solved the drink problem. Now, I don't want to be cocky about it, but I've solved the drink problem. I got a whole shit wrong with me. A whole lot of shit wrong with me. Bill Wilson once said, there's a whole lot wrong with us, of which a whole lot has to be done. And if you want to continuously grow spiritually, you just start working on one thing after the other. That's why people keep doing. Listen, if I didn't do this class, I wouldn't work the steps every year. So I keep doing this, and I work the steps right along with you guys in here every year. And this is the 26th year in a row I'm doing this every week. And I haven't missed a year of working the steps in 26 years. Why? Because I do this with you guys. I'm here doing it. I commit myself to this, and not because I'm a great guy. I commit myself to this because shit works. And shit works. So it's important that now that we know we have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems, I need to put that into practical application. But if I don't put it into practical application, it don't mean diddly. It means nothing. Bill says, belief in the power of God, step 2, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. So, you know what? What are the essential requirements of recovery? Well, there's your answer. The essential requirements of recovery is belief in the power of God, enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things are the essential requirements. So the next time you get up to the podium, don't tell everybody you don't know how you got here and how you did it and why you're here. The book tells you why. Now, here's the kicker. Bill says, simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. Oh. Us drunks, we love ourselves, we hate ourselves, we love and hate ourselves at the same time. Right? So destruction of self-centeredness is no matter how bad I am, I love me. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals. Revolutionary and drastic proposals. But the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. I tell you, Bill's very poetic. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. Now, just so you know, one of the reasons they put the appendix in the back of the book was because of this and Bill's attitude, right? Because as it explains in the appendix that I don't have it in this book, but it explains in the appendix that, most of us have, more of the, what they say? Thank you. Yeah, rather than the sudden impact, right? But Bill got it that way. And I know, I've met a couple of people over the years that had got that, and that's cool, but not me, most of us don't get that, I've had some really cool incidences and some very powerful spiritual experiences over the years, but I still got the school variety, like, slowly kind of working it. So they didn't want people to think that if you don't suddenly get hit with this, like, white light of sobriety, that you're doing something wrong and it's not working for you. So they put the appendix in when they reprinted, that they want you to understand that that's not necessarily the way it happens. It can happen that way, but not necessarily. So he says, for a moment I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I was still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally he shook his head, saying, something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were. The good doctor now sees many men who have such experiences. He knows they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I can help some of them. It's an understatement there, isn't it? Millions of people sober as a result of what Bill wound up doing. But perhaps I can help some of them. They in turn might work with others. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. Now, pay attention to this. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. He could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. Now, I looked up the word perfect. And the definition that I liked, that I wrote down, was as good as it is possible to be. There's different definitions for the word perfect, but as good as it's possible to be. If it's as good as it's possible to be, that's perfect. And if you stay sober and you continuously grow spiritually, your perfect will change. Like your God will change. Like your whole life will change. When I got sober, 100 people around me got well. As good as it is possible to be. That's perfect. We'll leave off there and pick up next week. Thanks, guys.